right, it's 2 past the hour. Welcome everyone to this month's monthly live workshop on building, deploying, and monitoring Next.js applications. My name's Schaefer. I'll be moderating the workshop today. Before we get started, just want to walk through a quick agenda. Obviously, we'll introduce you to today's hosts and guests before getting into setting up the Sentry-Netlify SDK and the Netlify integration, and then we'll walk through the workflow associated with that. We'll jump to a discussion on Headless Commerce and Web Vitals, and then look at some front-end performance specifically on monitoring those Web Vitals before wrapping up with Q&A. Today's host, if you've been with us before, you know Neil's face by now. Neil is Head of Solutions Engineering at Sentry, and he is joined by Ramin Sedighi from Netlify, also a solutions engineer. So before I pass it over to both of them, just some quick housekeeping. This question gets asked every time, and yes, this will be recorded and sent out next week. So don't worry if you have to drop off. We're gonna have a recording for you to rewatch. If you got questions, use the Q&A feature. If you see something that's been asked that you also want to ask, please upvote it. And if you have a question directed specifically at Neil or Ramin, please at them or indicate that your question is for them. It'll make my job a lot easier. And then lastly, at the end of the workshop today, there's a quick one-question survey. Really appreciate if you would fill it out, help us make future workshops even better. So without further ado, I will pass it over to Neil to give a more thorough introduction of himself, from me as well, and then we'll kick things off.
All right, sounds good. Thank you, Schaefer, for the warm introduction. As you said, my name is Neil Manvar. I head up solutions engineering here at Sentry. What I'm going to be showcasing today is our new Next.js SDK. And we all know why Next.js is important, right? The hybrid static and server rendering, TypeScript, and all of that good stuff, keeping us in one ecosystem, helping us get to production as soon as possible. What I'm going to be specifically covering is how to get the Sentry SDK installed. It used to be really painful because we didn't have a formal solution here. We made you install the JavaScript and Node SDK and basically wire up a bunch of stuff. Now it's going to be as close to one click as we could make it. And it's all going to be in sync. Source maps are going to be uploaded. We're going to be seeing good events and transactions. So I'll walk you all through that, but I want to hand it over to Ramin so that he can introduce himself, and he's going to create the production pipeline so that we can actually get this app to production with some monitoring built into it, right? So this is definitely a two-part effort here.
Amazing, thanks. Appreciate it, Neil. Again, thanks everyone for the opportunity. My name is Ramin Sedighi, Senior Solutions Engineer here at Netlify. And really excited to showcase Netlify's developer workflow and how you can spin up a new front-end site, and how Netlify takes care of the infrastructure for you, and you can go from Git to Glove very quickly. We also, as Neil mentioned, kind of aware of how important Next.js is to all of the developers out there today. So we also have a one-click configuration option on Netlify, which will easily spin up your site and let you deploy your projects within minutes. And we'll kind of showcase that workflow today, and really excited to showcase the whole workflow. Please ask questions throughout the webinar too. Really want to make sure this is interactive.
All right, so let's get started. First, I'm going to go showcase the application. And what we're going to do is get Sentry installed. So I'll take you through some of the documentation and the create project flow. But we have a Next.js app here. I have the code base right over here. And what we're going to start with is first, let's go over to Sentry. And here I'm on the project dashboard. Let's just go ahead and create a next project here. Set up alerting a little bit later, but Next.js. So now here, we're automatically given some instructions. It's going to be pretty basic to install. It's just going to be adding the package, so yarn add, and then we're going to do the wizard to create the proper config and set up the SDK. Lastly, we're going to insert traces sample rate to make sure where transactions are being spun up. And if we want to do any server-side performance capturing, we would wrap that with Sentry here would wrap the handler with Sentry, so we're tracking the appropriate things on the server routes. I'm going to take you all to the documentation where it's a little bit more in depth, and I can talk through this, and then we'll get it installed. So here, I went to JavaScript, Next.js, and you can see what comes with the SDK. So error monitoring, we'll have some populated breadcrumbs. We'll understand adoption and crash-free sessions and users and stuff like that. And we have performance monitoring here as well. As you saw earlier, all we have to do is install the package and then go ahead and run the wizard. What the wizard is going to do, if we don't have one already, it'll go ahead and create the client config for Sentry, the server config, where our SDK will be instantiated, and then the appropriate config in Next.config.js, and the credentials will be stored in Sentry.properties, or we could use our environment variables. And this is going to be used for uploading source maps and any artifacts up into Sentry. So I'm going to go ahead and do this. I've already installed the SDK just to kind of save time, so you all don't have to watch me do all of that, but you can see here, bam. And I'm going to go ahead and run the wizard. So here, when I run the wizard, if I'm authenticated in with Sentry, it'll go ahead and automatically detect my projects so that I can select which project I want to be integrated into. And here we go, select this one. And now, bam, we've been set up. That's all it takes here. So I already had it set up, and if you already have those files, it'll go ahead and produce these underscore files that you can go ahead and merge in as you need to. But let me go ahead over each part of this code here. So first, we start with the client here. So you can see Sentry.init, we're importing the SDK, and here's the DSM set up for that project, and trace the sample rate 1.0 as we want 100% of transactions sent up to Sentry for this demo. Server is going to be identical. Same thing. So just importing the SDK and then specifying how we want to sample and any other Sentry-init configs that we would want here. We see Sentry properties, which has our credentials, our projects, our auth token, and all of that other good stuff we want to put it in there. And lastly, in Next.config.js, what we'll see here is our previous exports, and then with Sentry config, and also with Sentry Webpack plugin option. So what we're doing here is wrapping this with the Sentry config and also including the Sentry Webpack so that we can get source maps and any other stuff uploaded in with Sentry. And we're doing this all under the hood. So when you call yarn build, all of this is going to be done. Source maps are going to be uploaded. It'll read from any config files that we would need, and bam, we're set up to get a production pipeline set up, get this out. If there's any errors, if there's slow performance, we're going to know about all this stuff through the events and transactions. So this is all it takes, just to kind of recap this. npm install or yarn install the plugin, and then the wizard, which will generate the appropriate Sentry init configs, and then go ahead and wrap accordingly in Next.config.js, also specifying Webpack there, and some credentials and Sentry properties. And if you want to do any server-side stuff, go ahead and wrap the handler here with Sentry as well. So that's it here. As I mentioned, now we want to get this to production. I don't want to just mess around on localhost here. Let's get this out there and get it in front of folks and try to do this as one click and seamless as possible. So I'm going to go ahead and get this onto Netlify. We have the docs over here. Stick you over here. And now what the build plugin will do, and I'll hand it over to Ramin shortly to demo all the Netlify side of things, is we'll get the source maps uploaded to Sentry and all the release management stuff. And one of my favorite features here is it will configure commits and all of that good stuff, where we can identify the suspect commit, the suggested assignee. So when something goes wrong within Sentry on the error generating an issue, we'll know who introduced it and who best to fight that fire here. So Ramin, you mind helping me get my code to production and going over the Netlify side of things, and then we can kind of trigger an error and go through the whole workflow.
Lovely. Let's get into it. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. What we're gonna do is, as Neil mentioned, we're going to take our project and deploy the Git repository that Neil was sharing, which has our Next.js application, and we're going to deploy it to the web. Netlify is a platform that has a CI/CD infrastructure under it, and allows you to build your sites from your Git repository, and uploads your entire site to our multi-cloud CDN, which is specifically built and optimized for front-end applications. So we'll go ahead and get started with deploying a brand new application in this workflow. So in this option, in this configuration, right now we're using a GitHub repository. So we'll go ahead and check against the GitHub API. And in this specific repo, I think we have Sentry in the name. So we'll go ahead and click it and find that project. I have an option to deploy additional branches within this project and configure my build to the specific configurations. Like if I need to add additional environment variables to let my project run, for instance, if I need to do Sentry auth token and add that to my project, I can go ahead and do that here as well. Just copying it from another screen. Cool. So, from the get-go, I'm able to upload the necessary information that Sentry is going to need to run my project. And this is going to allow my build process to capture and upload all of my source maps to Sentry during the build step. So I'm going to go ahead and deploy site. And what Netlify is doing for you now is spinning up that build infrastructure. And it's creating and installing all the dependencies that your project may need. And then it's going to create the static assets, and then eventually it's going to upload it to the multi-cloud CDN. While that's working, let me cover a couple of things about this build infrastructure and kind of developer workflow. The deploy settings, we're able to configure additional environments that we can potentially deploy as well. So one of the benefits of Netlify's developer productivity platform is that you can deploy unlimited environments for your project. So you can test your code out ahead of time as well before your code makes it well into production. You can work with Netlify and Sentry to identify a lot of those bad code before it makes it out into production. And the way you could do that is give each developer their own environment to mess around with, to create code and to break things. You can either deploy all of your additional Git branches from a Git repository, or you can specify specific environments and kind of make it feature 2021, times whatever your release may be. So you can add unlimited environments, and it's all Git centric. As you saw, we were able to easily spin up our code base from a Git repository, build it, and Netlify ties in all of that serverless functionality so that if you need to make API calls to third-party systems, it's all tied into that Git-based centric workflow. You don't need to deploy serverless functions elsewhere. On that workflow, that was kind of quick high level, but where Sentry comes into play and connects with Netlify is through the plugins mechanism, right? So right now, Netlify identified that we have a Next.js application that we deployed through the Git repository, and it auto-installed our kind of essential Next.js package. We also want to install our Sentry plugin. So let me go ahead and search for that, and I'm going to install this. It's a one-click install. Our latest site that we deployed already shows up at the top of the list, and I can go ahead and click install. Now, every single build that I have on this specific site, it's going to use environment variables that I attach to the specific project, and it's going to upload all of those source maps to Sentry. So let's go ahead and take a look at one of the projects we have already deployed that me and Neil have been kind of gotten up ahead of time. As Neil mentioned, this is that similar project. It's already been deployed. We have multiple environments associated with it as well. So we can go into the production environment. We see we have our main branch and we have our intro logic environment as well, right? So in this moment, I want to go ahead and kind of check out our experience, maybe add something to the cart, right? Let's go ahead and maybe I'll open up my developer console just to see what's going on, and maybe a medium size for me. We don't have anything available. So we'll go ahead and add to cart, and we see that we have an error that was thrown here on our application. And for an e-commerce business, this is no good. You know that this is actually going to hurt your conversion rates and your sales. So Neil, is there anything we can do about this to quickly resolve and figure out what's going on here from Sentry?
Yep, taking a look right now. It looks like I'm getting alerted. I'm going to go ahead and present my screen. I'm already
Perfect.
at the issues page. So let's take a look what's going on here. So here we can see about 11 seconds ago, an error came in. I've already pulled that up ahead of time here. And here, it looks like it's a type error, cannot read property func of defined. Let's take a look at what was happening. It looks like, we were on this page, which was the product handle care with hoodie. Let's go down to the stack trace here. It looks like when add to cart was called, the loading button started, and then this code just errored it out. Oh yeah, looks like we're calling this doesn't exist, and obviously this is going to error out. We should get that fixed. I'll get back to you in a moment, Ramin. But what we can see here is we see the stack trace, and this is what we would have seen in the browser, what Ramin is showing. This is what Sentry did to it. We deobfuscated it using those source maps. And my favorite feature of all, we identified the commit that caused it all. And this is all done through that plugin. We have to set up the Git integration beforehand, which the documentation goes over as well. But with Sentry and Netlify and passing over all of the credentials as those environment variables and letting the Webpack do its magic, and also understanding which commits made into this release, what we can derive here is me being Neil, and this commit causing that error means that I should be assigned this because I'm the best one equipped to fight these fires. And you all know Sentry, so these tags provide the clarity that I need in case I need to understand who's being impacted. I understand what's going on here before hitting the error. So we can see the add to cart button was clicked, that generated an error, and then any other further information we can capture as well. So we got all of that Next.js context, and I also want to understand why this was slow. So with one click, I can go into performance and I see exactly what happened. The page was loaded, Next.js hydration stuff happened, the browser did its things, imported the resources that it need, and then a bunch of logic started happening. We started importing some JSON files, and then at the end, we even see where Web Vitals kicks in as well. And first input delay, the FCP, the LCP is all listed within here. So this gives us an understanding of exactly what was happening, where the slowness was, and is also linked to the error. So you can see, bam, an error occurred in this transaction. So now I understand what's broken on the right-hand side and what's slow on the left-hand side, all within one click, all within one interface, and I can get all the information. So perhaps this error introduced this slowness or this broken experience, but I have the entire picture here, the commit that caused it all, the impact that I had on the user, and so forth. So Ramin, this looks like it's going to take a little bit to fix, but you mind actually just publishing one of our older stable versions, and we'll just go in from there. And meanwhile, we figure out how to stabilize and roll forward.
Fabulous. Yes, this is where that workflow, full developer workflow comes into the picture, right? We identified an error was thrown on our application, and it was actually in production. So the team right now, an engineering team right now would be on fire. So what we can do on Netlify is all of the assets, every single release that we have published is still available on Netlify for you to easily revert to. We can go to an intro logic branch where we've been working on, and I can go ahead and revert to any previous version of the site. I can preview that deploy. For example, I can see how does this function, does an error still occur? And I have that unique URL associated to that specific version of the site that I can kind of check and kind of play around and work with Neil and team and say, hey, does this issue still occur? If it doesn't, I can go ahead and publish my deploy, and instantly Netlify is going to roll back your site, and instantly it's going to invalidate the cache across the multi-global CDN. So let's say users in London or Netherlands or Sao Paulo, they won't be accessing your site with the previous older version of the site. All of that has been instantly updated across the globe. So now if we go back into our site, the latest version of the site is the rolled back version, which we reverted to, so the published version. And that would be a workflow of where we kind of mitigate an incident and easily resolve that issue in production. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing.
Awesome. Thank you, Ramin. Looks like we're in a good place, and we'll go ahead and debug that and go forward. Although I think I know what I need to do to fix that piece of code, because it's pretty obvious. So that concludes it for the Sentry and Netlify portion. I think we're going to open it up to just a quick discussion, and then we'll go into Web Vitals, right? So, Ramin, you mind kind of opening up with, this was a Shopify headless commerce example, and we're seeing more and more folks go to Netlify and work on these type of headless commerce setups. You mind giving us a little bit more color there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, thank you, Neil. You hit it right on the head. There is the fact that teams are now migrating to a headless e-commerce platform or architecture. There are many benefits in this type of architecture or headless e-commerce approach. Specifically in the commerce world, there is a lot of benefit just in the headless, architecture in general. Whether you're working with any data-driven sites or statically blog sites, but specifically for commerces, when you work with the Jamstack site and you're able to pre-build your static assets, like your product pages, your images, descriptions, the different variations of those products, when they are statically pre-built and it's just pure JavaScript, HTML, CSS, and it's uploaded to Netlify's multi-cloud CDN. Again, well, I mentioned Netlify's multi-cloud CDN, but let's kind of unpack what that means. Teams typically have their own infrastructure today, whether on built in-house on AWS or CloudFront or Azure or whatever the provider may be, and that is finely tuned for the specific org that they're working in. In that picture, teams only have one provider. They're only working with one provider. They may have a backup as well, but they're not finely or tightly coupled and work well together. In Netlify, we have multiple cloud providers underpinning our CDN. So we can have a really wide global infrastructure so that we can reach the globe very quickly. And if we see that any of the edge nodes across the globe on any of the providers is experience DDoS attack, for example, we can roll over to the next provider, ensuring that your site is always going to be up and it's always going to be performant and not have any sort of impact when there are spikes on that on the network. So there's a Netlify infrastructure which is optimized and pre-built, built specifically for these Jamstack applications that helps sites be more performant. But there's also the Jamstack way of developing the statically pre-built decoupled approach where you use serverless functions to communicate with backend services. In this approach, sites are also inherently much faster as well, since you're only pulling static assets on your web browser, and all the API calls to complete the transaction are done via APIs to the backend commerce. So this approach just creates a really fast, snappy user experience. And that's why teams are adopting this on Netlify, because Netlify allows you to easily spin up your sites, connect to your backend services, and you have really fast performance sites that is built to scale and enterprise ready. So I will pause there, but essentially the gist would be statically pre-built sites are a lot faster, and teams adopting this approach specifically for better conversion rates across their headless e-commerce applications.
Sounds good. That makes a lot of sense. You want to serve up all the assets and everything faster. With that being said, I think that's a good segue to how we measure how fast we're serving this up, how fast our users are able to work with our application once it's in the browser and so forth. So I think when you're using something like Next.js, it's really going to help with your FCP, your LCP, and some of these other things, because everything is so performant and bundled in such a way. So with that being said, after serving the customer, we got to monitor it, and let's go into Web Vitals and get into how we can make sure that what we're serving with Next.js and with Netlify is behaving as we need to. But totally makes sense. And I think one of the other things that was something I realized as I've been working with Netlify is just the time to get something up and running kind of globally. Like, with all of that being said, just like how you showed, just putting in the Git repo and then figuring out what we want, what environments, and then kind of just going from there and concentrating on the development and the iteration of the code itself, right?
Yeah,
And in that case, it would be the e-commerce logic, right? So going in, I'm going to go actually piggyback off of where I left off, which was this screen. So here is, remember the page load that we were looking at? We saw the FCP, the LCP. I wanted to provide a little bit more color here. So what I'm going to do is hop over to this project or this organization, and then let's head over to performance, and let's go ahead and just show all our front end page loads. So we have FCP, First Contentful Paint. The name kind of says what it is, but it's when the first image or DOM element is in the viewport, right? And then followed by largest contentful paint, where the big bulky element kind of shows up here. Then first input delay, when we can actually start interacting with it. And if there's any shifting happening, I know we're all trying to load a bunch of elements into the page, and things like infinite scroll and all of these other things will mess with the shifting, adds, who knows. This is the layout shift score that measures the stability of the page here. So a few reasons why this is important. One, in the front end land, it doesn't really help just understanding transaction durations, right? It doesn't understanding just how long it took for the browser to start loading this and finish loading this. You want to understand how the JavaScript, the CSS, and the HTML is all behaving with each other to present a usable interface, and then get the customer to an end goal as soon as possible. If the page takes too long to load because too many elements are shifting, and the largest contentful thing hasn't loaded up properly, but the ads and everything else has, or something like that, that's a problem. We want to be in the place where we present the most useful information and the most pertinent stuff up front and within a reasonable time frame. So what's happening is we're surfacing the Web Vital stuff as part of all these transactions and surfacing it in all of these views as well. But let's go ahead and dive into exactly why this would be useful and how we can implement this. So I want to go ahead and monitor my tool store page. So what I'm doing here is just flagging one of my most important transactions and one of my most important projects. And I am then going to go ahead and set an alert for all of this stuff. So what we want to do here is dive in to, let's say, largest contentful paint, and we see exactly where it is off, and we can go ahead and set an alert. Before I do that, I actually want to talk about some ideal measurements here. So Google is starting to take all of this into their page ranking as well. So if we do have one of these that are really out of bound, we might not show up where we want to show up, as well as we're not providing the experience we want to our customers. So an ideal LCP measurement is about 2.5 seconds. An ideal first input delay is less than 100 milliseconds, and an ideal measurement for cumulative layout shift is less than 0.1. So you can see I'm pretty much within bounds when it comes to these two, largely because my app isn't very complex. And here is the one where I'm very, very out of bounds and I'm not providing the experience that I want here, right? So let's go ahead and make sure that we know when things are out of bounds here. So here we have the ability to create an alert, and we have the data right here. So it looks like it hops over to 4 seconds where it's very poor. So let's go ahead and kind of set something at a ceiling of 4 or 5 seconds. So here I'm going to specify transactions, and now I have all of this data set here. What I want to do next is select the LCP on the y-axis, and let's go ahead and create that alert now. So let's say above for now, let's move this 9 seconds. Let's go to warning about 7 seconds, and we'll resolve when it goes to 4 seconds. There we go. And we can add any actions, email, any member as necessary. Or select. There we go. So end to end, from having a Next.js app, deploying it, and then getting it to production using Netlify, being able to test our builds without many clicks, or having to deal with the build system or any providers, and now being able to understand what's going on and then being proactive about it so it doesn't happen again. and we know when we've compromised the user experience. So that's how we wanted to kind of tie this all together here. That's the end from the Sentry end. Anything else you wanna add on?
I think from my perspective, Neil.
Yep.
No, that's great. You hit it all on all the right points. From Netlify perspective, again, the developer workflow ensures you're able to iterate on your site quickly so that you can improve and build better versions of your website. And what the unlimited environments offer you is that iteration of your actual application so that you can catch these improvements early on in the development cycle. For example, being able to tunnel into your local host machine and share a live URL with your team of what you're seeing on your local machine is very powerful as you collaborate and do work on code together. For instance, we have collaborative deploy previews, which allows you to leave comments within a specific deploy preview and share feedback with your development team. So the development workflow, I think, has been very important to teams working within Netlify in ensuring they're able to build faster, better, more modern sites, as well as the infrastructure. It's very important. Those two go hand in hand. So it's very hard to build performant sites with infrastructure that is hard to keep up with, but it's also hard to build really performant sites if your infrastructure is the only thing that is finely tuned. So Netlify and Sentry and the partner ecosystem allows you to build really performant modern applications and get the information you need to iterate on your website and application really quickly to build those better user experiences. Looking at some of these questions in here, thank you for keeping them coming.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll actually jump right into some questions. We've got about 6 of them right now. Audience, feel free to pepper in some more. You guys are being shy this month, so don't feel free to ask whatever you'd like to Neil. If it's specific to Neil, please @ him so I know to direct it towards him. If your question is for Ramin, please @ Ramin in the queues just so I know. All right, so we'll get started here. First question, do we need to have consent from the user before tracking the user with Sentry regarding GDPR? Does the Wizard plugin help with this in any way?
Yeah, I think this is more a generic GDPR question, which is, always ask your company and your lawyers and whatever the policies are. But generally, if you anonymize the information, you're not tracking any of the personal stuff that tracks back, and we have data scrubbing to help you with this on both the client side and server side. We should be clear of GDPR. As per the second question, does the Wizard plugin help with this in any way? No, the Wizard just basically gets Sentry installed, does the Sentry init stuff, and then the stuff in Next.js to make sure that we're wrapped and we get the source maps up, or we get the web package.
Great.
So it's more like the 4 or 5 things that you would need to install, just doing it for you and making sure it's all in sync.
Great. I think this one's for Ramin, not specified, but the question is, what happens if we have more changes apart from UI changes, like database changes? If I'm rolling back, I would like to roll back all the changes.
Yeah, great question. And this is maybe a little bit deeper discussion we can have on how Jamstack applications are built and kind of deployed to the globe on Netlify. Essentially, when you pre-build your site, you're pulling all of the content so that if you're working with a commerce application, you're pulling your product information, you're pulling the description, you're pulling the prices from your database, your backend commerce provider, and statically generating that site with all of that information pre-populated and then deploying it to the CDN. So the content is all pre-built. Now there's a bit of dynamic information, like when I need to make a transaction, I make an API call, it sends it back and it sends it to somewhere in a backend, or different use cases. For the runtime, you have serverless functions, right, to communicate with those backend APIs, and those can also change. Netlify couples all of those together. So if your logic of the application is changing and communicating with your backend APIs, that specific serverless function changes, that is also rolled back along with the rest of your site, which includes UI changes, as well as redirects, proxies, and rewrites. All of those are tightly coupled with each of the builds on Netlify. So when you roll back, you know exactly what state of your site was at, not just the UI, but the logic of the application. And then just another last point here is that since you're working with a decoupled application, you're going to be using backend services and, like you mentioned, database as well. Those separately have to be rolled back if you need to roll back as well. So Netlify takes care of the presentation layer, but if you need to roll back your backend services or database, that separately needs to be handled as well.
Great. Thanks, Ramin. Next up, does the Next.js SDK take care of deleting the source maps after uploading them to Sentry?
Yeah, good question. I don't think so. What we're doing is just making sure that we're outputting source maps, number one, via Webpack, and then number two, uploading them to Sentry. And we don't want to impact your application in any way. So go ahead and delete those source maps if you need to, strip them before you push to your production or CDN or whatever you need to. But I'm pretty sure the answer is no. We don't delete your source maps there. We just upload.
Cool. Someone's curious about the impact on the bundle size of Sentry on Next.js page bundles.
Yeah, so it should be negligible, but there is this problem that someone else kind of mentioned as well, which is the experimental serverless trace, which increases the bundle size. But outside of that one, we typically want to be minimally invasive. And on the error side, we're only attaching to the error handlers and making sure, those are sent up as events. And then on the transaction side, we're just making sure transactions that you care about are sent up, and you can set up sampling and you can figure out which transactions are important. But in that sense, we're not instrumenting everything. We just want to instrument what might be useful to the Next.js or average JavaScript developer in regards to debugging an issue. So you might see in the transaction that I was looking at, it doesn't show everything like a profile or something like that. It just shows what we deem important in some of the events within a browser session that you would want to know about, right? So it's the assets coming in, the hydration stuff, XHRs and all that type of stuff.
Got it. Okay, I'm going to go into part of that question just because there's a question in there for Ramin, I believe. But after integrating the Sentry Next.js plugin, just like you said, Neil, you're forced to choose the experimental serverless trace target as Sentry Next.js plugin. Facing this problem because of this, we're seeing build size increased from 50 megs to 2 gigs, and Netlify function supports about up to 50 megabytes per function. What is your recommendation from both of you all to solve these problems?
Yeah, I've already escalated this to our SDK developer, and we will figure this out. But the experimental serverless trace thing is correct. You do have to get that trained or changed, and that it looks like has resulted in a bigger bundle size here, and we should probably look into that.
From a Netlify perspective, when sites typically get larger in size, like teams work with larger catalog sizes or enterprise use cases grow and the site grows in size, teams need bigger infrastructure to run those builds. So Netlify definitely helps you scale up with that type of workload. And it sounds like you may need more horsepower and more machine to run your builds, and we can help you with that. So we do have infrastructure specifically built for these larger sites, and we can absolutely work with you and kind of give you a trial of how it would run your site on this type of environment. So I would just recommend reaching out to our team, and someone can reach out to you, and whether it's a sales form or writing into a support ticket, someone can definitely help you give that a shot. But it sounds like you may need it's around 20 pages. Oh, I see. But you said maybe the function needs a bigger memory. So we can increase all of those memories and different allocations when you work on our larger infrastructure.
Thank you. Okay, I'm moving right along. I'm seeing some of the third-party scripts I've included on my pages generating errors which affect my Sentry stats and alerts. What is the best practice for handling these if fixing them is out of my control? Should I stop using them? Should I ignore them?
Yeah, good question. So anything that is not actionable, and so let's take, for example, your third-party scripts, and they might be resulting in some errors, which then is now constituting to being noise and is generating these alerts and kind of disturbing a little bit of your workflow. So if those third-party scripts errors aren't impacting your page, or it's something that your developer or you would not want to be notified about, we want to filter that. So we can, within the SDK, we can do something like allow URLs or deny URLs to specify which URLs are important to us and where we want to surface errors from. So we can specify, we can deny the URLs for these third-party scripts so that we don't see them and they never even get sent to Sentry. So one good that the SDK never sent it up, meaning now you're not sending up one extra request up to Sentry, which is good for performance, and you're not deducting from your quota, and you're not being alerted about it. You can go ahead and also delete and discard them on the Sentry server side, and we have some inbound filtering as well. But the recommendation is to filter them one way or another, preferably within your SDK at the earliest level, so you're not being the task of even sending it up. I'll go ahead and link some documentation as well in regards to best practices for filtering here.
Cool. Great. Pretty general question here. Do you support AMP pages?
Yeah, that would be for me. Yeah, as long as it's you can build the static bundle, you can definitely upload that into the Netlify platform. So yeah.
Great. Last one I'm seeing here, unless someone asks a couple last minute ones while I'm reading it and we're answering it. How do you configure source map upload with custom domain? Yeah,
good question. So this is using Sentry Webpack, which is using Sentry CLI under the hood. And the domain, just like the Oregon project and some of the other things that we're feeding in, is something you can specify. So I just look up the environment variable or the property for that, and you can go ahead and overwrite that. So I believe the question is, instead of uploading to Sentry.io, how do I upload to a custom domain here? You would just overwrite that config environment variable.
Got it. And then back to the previous question about supporting AMP pages. Does Sentry also support AMP pages?
Good question. I am not that in the know about AMP pages, so that would be something I would have to follow up on.
Got it. Dominic, we'll follow up with you with more clarification on that afterwards. Great. Well, I don't see any more questions. Actually, one just came in. Does that config override affect server source maps upload? From the question about how do you configure source map upload?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this is one of the good things about our new Next.js SDK is that it's all kind of in sync here. So it's all it's all one Webpack config, which is all kind of being fed in. So once you do overwrite that, it should take place for both your client side and server side source maps.
Got it. One more. What is the communication link to ask our questions during the configuration process?
Oh yeah, feel free to write into us. You'll see a little, you can write into us in many different ways. Just, sales@sentry.io. We can help you out there. We can help you out via support. Just feel free to communicate and we'll triage it and get it to the right place here. If you're looking for a supported POC and a larger kind of engagement here and getting this to production on a bigger app, I would recommend writing into sales. Otherwise, go ahead and get started, and we can help you through support, and then we'll get you configured. Our goal is to make sure you're configured and instrumented properly, so you don't have that noise, and you can stop playing racquetball when these alerts happen and they're actionable, and then you have to they mean something to you, so you can fix them or roll back or do whatever we need to within Sentry-Netlify.
Great. Well, we'll wrap up here. A quick reminder, there is a 1-question survey after you leave the workshop today. It'd really mean a lot if you could answer it. We'll help improve future workshops. Thanks again for everyone for attending. Be on the lookout for an email next Monday with a link to the recording if you want to go back and revisit any parts of it. Until next time, take care, be safe. We'll see you again.